Hello you, it's me. Today we're going to talk about The Skin, first book in the Black Hind Wake series by J.E. Hannaford. The author very kindly sent me a copy of this, so thank you very much. I heard about this one from a good friend of mine and that it had Selkies in it, which are my all-time favourite mythical creature, and which, if anybody doesn't know what Selkies are people who can change form between human and seal by donning and shedding a seal skin. I was very excited for this. I had a great time with it. I'm going to be doing plot, review, things I liked, things I didn't like. It'll all be on the time bar. This is set in a world where sea levels have risen, and after some presumably world-shaking event, human society has regressed. Sea spirits, known as Old Ones, survive, and unlike in our world, their existence is known, probably because humans have been forced to develop a much closer bond and reliance on the encroaching sea. They are also feared and hunted, but the earth depends on them, with nature and other forces being held in balance by their innate magic. When our main character, a Selkie, has their skin stolen and sacrifices themselves to protect their best friend, she is captured and sold to the highest bidder, and put to work in captivity as she plots her escape and revenge. We also follow Sal, the beloved by high society captain of a pleasure ship called the Barge, and his crew of Old Ones who sail the ocean trying to liberate others like themselves from expensive collections and the confines of private aquariums. So I've read a lot of Selkie stuff, and it wouldn't be right to say there isn't much you can do with Selkies, but more that not a lot is done with Selkies. It's always, a Selkie falls for a human, has their fling. Their skin is stolen or hidden, and they spend their life standing on a beach, staring out to sea, pining for the people that they've lost, until some happenstance brings it back, or they die miserable. They are a very melancholic mythical creature, and there are rarely happy endings. Selkie stories are often just iterations of the same thing, with flourishes and swirls, and it's nice to see that story expanded into something much bigger. It's nice to see a Selkie not be assigned the role of powerless victim. It's nice to see a Selkie story about vengeance, about justice, about class and empowerment. The only other time I've seen Selkie stuff used within a much wider pantheon to tell a much bigger story was an incredible movie called Song of the Sea, which came out in 2014. It's one of my favourite animated films ever. Highly recommend you check it out. I don't often spend a lot of time talking about external book aesthetics, unless it's a particularly juicy hardback. But I'll take a second to say this book does an awful lot right on that front. Number on the spine, yes please, all books should do it. Lovely cover, map within a few pages. Love me a fantasy map. If I hadn't had this recommended to me, it's probably one that would have grabbed me anyway. This book is really lovely with all of its descriptives, with its romanticism of the ocean, all the marine metaphors and analogies that it uses. One thing I think that comes across very clearly is the author's clear love of the sea. And it genuinely is something that they write so well that it becomes contagious. The main character misses all of these aspects of the ocean, and you find yourself longing for them alongside her. I've seen a couple of reviews label this as dystopian, but I think I'd be more inclined to just put it in the post-apocalypse box, with the lingering ancient technology and the warring feudal society. It kind of, in some ways, because of that, has a Waterworld vibe. Yeah, the post-apocalypse box is where this feels it naturally goes for me. But also that's something I'm really happy about, because I've been begging for ages for a post-apocalypse book featuring mythological creatures. And a lot of research has clearly gone into the myth side of this book, and some of the fresh imaginings of what these creatures are like, the way they hunt, the languages they speak, their faces underneath the glamours that they present to humans are amazing. I think my favourite in this story was the Leathergill Siren. I think that's such a beautiful one, and it's going to stick with me for a long time. Beneath the fantasy imagery and tales about sea creatures, I think, lies a scathing attack on human exploitation and many aspects of environmental abuse. A warning about taking the world for granted, about strip mining its resources beyond repair. But what gets me thinking in this book is that after all of this stuff has happened and led to the cataclysm after which the story is set, it's all happening again. Is this the author saying humans will never change? Or are they saying that events in the past have been forgotten and that historical erasure is something that will perpetuate a never-ending cycle of destruction. There's this common theme in fantasy novels that feature other sentient fantasy mythological races of humans are a plague. But I think it is in this, but I think it's here for a different reason, even though the outcome vibe is the same. As well as climate stuff and rich people class stuff, there are questions in here about animal captivity, and I wonder if on that front as well the book reflects the author's views. I think there's a very, very heavy ecological conservationist mindset that went into how this book was constructed. I think that comes across very strongly. I think one of the author's real strengths that jumped out at me is action sequences, which are hard to write well. I thought these rescue, escape, battle sequences flowed very nicely, were paced very, very nicely, and I think they read to me a lot more naturally than other parts of the book that were just sedate conversation or conversation-based scenes. I think more than anything else, this is a book about deciding where your loyalties lie, about whether you can balance being loyal to one party and doing what's right when those things might not always be the same. It's about found family. It's about the people you choose ultimately being more important than blood relation. And that's something, if nothing else, that makes this book feel very cozy. This isn't a YA book by any means. It's a very adult book with adult themes. But I think the coziness of this book would make it a great gateway book into fantasy if you've only read YA before. Stuff I wasn't sure about. And I guess this will be spoilery bits. There's one main thing I think I can pull this book up on. And I'll see if I can tell you that bit without straying into spoiler territory. For the first 2/3 of the book, multiple storylines are told in alternating chapters, taking place at slightly different times in the past, in the present. And I was absolutely riveted for the first 2/3 of this book. And then the storylines converge and you figure out how they're all connected. And then suddenly, I don't think it's that the storylines converge that makes it difficult to read, but more that the format of the book changes almost. That the pacing and the chapter structure becomes something very different after a certain point. And the viewing position that you have as a reader for the characters that you've been focusing on up until this point is flipped on its head. There were a couple of chapters that I had to reread because I honestly kept losing focus with them. And I really fell off the wagon with the book because of that. I ended up putting it down for a couple of weeks and then coming back to it. That was the only thing that spoiled the experience for me. But unfortunately, it was a big thing to have to push through. But despite that, there is a huge amount of room for growth and world building here. One thing I'm really excited for is we see how the old ones are slotting themselves into human society. But what is their society like? Will we get to examine the world from the perspective of the interior of a Selkie court? Or a family of sirens living free under the Antarctic ice? How would they view what's going on? There's a lot of opportunity for interesting perspective. I also can't wait to see what other mythological creatures the author brings in next. There is a dragon on the map, fingers crossed. So thanks for tuning in for my review of this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe, that's down below. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Goodreads. That'll be linked down below as well. If you like sci-fi, don't forget to join our Interstellar Sci-Fi Book Club. That's going to be linked down below as well. And I'll see you soon for the next review. Bye.